Hi, I'm Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, and this is the Bonsai Stuff Podcast. It's a dark and dreary old time for us in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia at the moment, with lots of rain, lots of cold weather, and it's really feeling miserable, to be honest. It's everything's getting sodden. The pots are definitely way wetter than what they should be. The leaves on the trees maybe aren't turning quite as vibrant as what they should be because everything's just a little bit too wet. But it's one of those times where we need to be on guard and prepared for what's about to happen with winter. So I was asked a little while ago on the YouTube channel about positioning for maples and how to avoid leaf burn and that sort of thing. And I thought that's really pertinent to now, especially as we head towards the winter dormancy and cooler times in the southern hemisphere, but also for the northern hemisphere people listening to the podcast as well, because you sort of got to get ready for the complete opposite, the sun, the heat. So let's talk about that for a little bit with the podcast, and hopefully we can all gain something from it, and the bonsai get happy and healthy, and we get smiles. Be nice, huh? So first up, I want to have a bit of a natter about preparing for winter, because we're on the home stretch now for autumn. Only a really short period of time left to go, and then we're into the depth of a couple of months of cool weather and wet weather and dormancy for the bonsai, which is really nice. But one of the things that you really need to be mindful of, and what's starting to happen now with this excessively wet run we're having at the moment, is that the roots on your trees can stay too wet. Now, if you're in a situation where you've got growth, right, where you've got the tree taking up water and nutrients for foliage, for strength, whatever it is, then that water in the pot is being utilised, being taken away, being absorbed, being transferred to the tree's vascular system and moving through the tree, through your bonsai. Once the dormancy hits and as things start to slow down, the big fear that I've got is that water stays there and accumulates and effectively drowns the roots. It suffocates them, and that can lead to a root rot situation where your bonsai's engine, which I'll talk a little bit more later on, talking about maple positioning and stuff like that, but the core of the tree, the driver, the root system that supplies everything that we need to our trees and what should be our number one focus, suddenly starts to take a hammering and starts to feel the pinch. So you've got to start preparing now. And one of the things that I do to prepare is get little lengths of wood, whether it's dowel or branches or rocks, even small rocks, and start getting them ready. So when I walk around and I can see on the pots that it's starting to get too wet, that slimy sludge that I talked about last podcast starts to accumulate, and you just get a general feel that something's not right. Things are just staying way too wet. Then whack that little bit of wood underneath the edge of the pot, and it will lower the water table inside the pot and allow water to run off one side of the root system. So one side of the root system generally gets the ability to dry out. The other side will stay too wet. So it's important that you don't just set and forget. So don't just put that bit of wood under it, leave it for 3 months and then walk away. It's one of those things that you're going to need to be mindful of, that over time you might need to switch the angle of the pot so the water then runs off the other side. Otherwise, obviously you're going to have one side of the root system which is viable and healthy, and the other side of the root system which is going to be rotten and dead. And that's definitely not what we want. So that's part of the preparation for winter. The other part is, I talked about fertilising and making sure you get that fertiliser on there. It's really important as we head into winter that fertiliser is removed. One, because it's not going to be doing anything as the trees are dormant. But secondly, those tea bags that I use, starts to contain and hold a lot of water. So it creates a real wet, damp part on the root system, and it stops the water from being able to get out of that root particles, the soil particles And I find it can really start to suffocate, especially the smaller trees where, a tea bag that's 9 centimetres by 7 centimetres, can have a real impact and cover probably, 50% of the pot surface. Bigger trees, obviously, big pots, it's going to have less of an impact. But on the bigger trees, I've put a lot more tea bags on there. So it's just good habit to go around with a bucket or a bag, take all the fertiliser off when winter gets here, and just be done with it. Recycle the sticks that you've used to the stakes that you've used to hold the tea bags in to stop the pesky possums and rats and dogs, or you've tried to anyway to hold them in. Recycle those, but yeah, get rid of the tea bags off the surface. The other thing that I do is, because I'm a big user of sphagnum moss with my trees once I've repotted, I find that that's nearly 9-10 months since they've been repotted. By the time winter gets here, I find that moss can stay too wet. It can start to turn into moss, which looks nice, but at the winter time, I find that it can become a real pain and hold too much moisture. So this, as we head into winter, it's another job you've got to put on the list, is get your rake out or your chopsticks and just take off that surface moss, the sphagnum moss that you've put on after repotting, but also any moss that's starting to accumulate on the surface of the pots. I am very mindful that moss can be very destructive when it gets to the trunks of our bonsai. And one of the things that we love the most about our bonsai is bark. And wet moss sitting on nice, beautiful bark can have a rotting effect, and you'll find that you'll end up with this inverse taper where the bark that was growing at the base of the tree suddenly falls off because the moss has made it so sodden and wet that it rots off. So I try and be really, really acutely aware that any moss that I see starting to get on the trunk of the trees, get rid of it as quickly as you possibly can. Try and not let it accumulate, because it will overnight shoot up the trunk, and it's an absolute nightmare to get rid of. So moss reduction across the soil surface plus removal of moss off the trunk of the tree are some definite ones that are on the cards. The other thing for me and for anyone else that has Japanese black pines, it's time to get busy. Needle plucking, bud selecting, but also wiring your trees. May and June are the optimal times to be working on your pine trees, because they're heading right towards that final stage of growth, and things have sorted themselves out after decandling, and the length of the buds, so it's pretty safe to remove other buds now in those areas, because there's no further growth going to happen on those areas. Needles have set quite firmly, and they're changing colour. They're going from that vibrant green to the darker, more olive green. So that's the check that we can get into doing the work, and you need to stay on top of it. It is quite laborious going through and needle plucking and bud selecting on your trees, but you need to make sure that you're also doing that wiring phase as well. Talked about wiring, told you what my approach with it is, that by this stage with a lot of my advanced trees, it's just the tip wiring that I'll be doing to try and bring down that ski jump at the end. I won't be doing full redesigns, but if you want to get in and do some heavy bending on your pines, it's a pretty good time to get into that as well. So winter's almost here for us in Southern Hemisphere, especially down the southern states of Australia. So it's time to start getting ready for it. So just following on from the winter work where I briefly touched on the pine work and shaping side of things, I just wanted to do a bit of a quick overview on branch shaping and branch structure. I only take a couple of minutes, and then I want to move on to the maples. But it's really important that your branch development, or your pad setting, your branch structure will evolve over time. So don't be daunted, or don't be worried that when you start shaping your branches they look a certain way, like they look very long and pointy and there's no volume to them. That's how they all start. Right? So what you've got to be aware of is movement and angle from the trunk. They're both really important things to do initially when you're styling a branch, or when you're wiring and shaping a branch. And it might be that you don't want to follow guidelines. Cool, no worries. But if you do want to follow tradition and you want to go down a path of having a classically shaped tree, then that's what I'll talk about. So when I work with black pines, or when I work with my pines of any kind, I'm wanting to get an acute or a sharp angle downwards from where that branch exits the trunk. All right, so the angle is very acutely pointing down, because for me, that's what I want to see on my pine bonsai. As I've said, that might not be everyone's cup of tea, and that's fine, completely fine. Be happy with what you want to look at. But for me, I make a clear distinction between, let's say, my deciduous and my pines, because my deciduous, when they come out of the trunk, I like them to be slightly on the upward angle and then coming down. That's generally what I'll do. And it's not every time, but it's a general feel that I want with my deciduous trees. With my pine trees, I want to feel where they come out of that trunk and they're acutely pushed down nice and tight, because, generally the images that I have of really good high-end pine bonsai that I like in my head, that's how they're shaped, and that's what I'd expect to see when I walk out and look at trees. There are, in Australia we don't get a lot of snow. Where I live, we don't get any snow, so there's no weight on the branch structure, so there's no snapping of the branches to give them that acute angle in the real world where I live when I walk around suburbia. But that's not what I'm intending to do and replicate when I'm working with my pine bonsai. What I want to replicate is what I perceive in my own head to be the perfect structure and design. And for me, it's an acute branch angle exiting the trunk. So when I'm wiring young branches, definitely I'll be on those branches and I'll be cranking them down as much as I possibly can and getting a really, really sharp, sort of almost 45-degree or less angle on the trunk line. And then as that branch comes out, it's at that angle, but then as it sort of gets towards a distance that I'm happy with being away from the trunk, then I'll start to flatten that pad out. So it comes out acutely sharp, then it flattens out and I can start to build my pad structure on that. So one is the branch angle from the trunk. The second is when you look down at that branch from the top or you look at it from the side, you want to have left and right movement in it. You want to have some kind of interest. Try not to make it a straight peg. Try not to make it, a piece of wood that comes straight out of there and is bent down, because it's just a bit boring. So try and get some kind of movement in it if you can. That's step one. The second is then you'll start working on the shape of your pad. So looking at it from the top down, you'll start to create a shape like your hand laid out flat with your fingers sticking out. Something like that. Doesn't need to be that, but that's just a rough shape to give you an idea. So your branch comes out nice and acutely from a downward angle from the trunk, comes out, got a bit of movement in that branch, and then you start to lay it out flat. That's always step two, is that laying out flat part. Where people get stuck is step three, and step three is the volume of the pad. It's the depth of the pad, and that's what I've talked over and over and over about, upward and buds growing in the center part of your pad that come out on like 45-degree angles, or you have two buds side by side. Don't always keep the lateral ones, maybe keep one that's slightly going up and one that's going out laterally, so that way you can start to build volume in your pads, and that's always the way it's going to develop. So just for anyone that's new to it, don't always think my pads never change. They always look the same. Look at what it is you're doing when you're pruning these things now and during growing seasons of spring. Have a look at how you're flattening the plate every time and aim for some kind of volume. Like I said, use your hand like cupped over with your palm facing down. That's roughly a sort of shape that you want to try and evolve and develop on your branch and pad structure. So wire it out, get the angle that you want, up, down, whatever it is, get some movement left, right, and something dynamic in it to make it interesting. Start shaping it into a flat sort of saucer shape, and then we start working on the volume of the pads. That's how all good bonsai are developed. That's how the structure on our trees gets better and better over years. When you're working with something like a pine, you can find that you can, in a couple of years, start to get, because of the needle clusters and the volume and the space that those individual needle clusters can take, we can get some nice volume pretty quickly. On a deciduous tree, working like that, because the winter silhouette is the one where we get to see the structure we've developed. It can be 80, 90, 150 years, something like that. It could take almost forever. I think deciduous trees are never finished. It can be it's generational. I'm doing work on stuff now that I can pass on to my great grandkids, so they can suddenly go, oh, you know what, that tree's finally getting there. The ramification on that Japanese maple, it's finally getting there. And it's like, yeah, well, that's because I've done hard work for the last 50 years on that thing. But anyway, so that's where I wanted to sort of interrupt this podcast and just talk about branch shaping, because we're going to be doing it now with wiring, especially, the pines, as I said. It's really important to stay focused that it doesn't need to be fully perfect at this point, but just get it on the path to being perfect. All right, so let's talk about maples. In particular, let's just chuck a couple: Japanese maples and trident maples. Let's talk about Japanese maples. It's probably the easiest one because they're the variety that I find more sensitive to leaf burn and can have some kind of repercussions for extreme hot weather. If you look around gardens, I'll talk about my garden. I've got about 4 or 5 in the front yard. Japanese maples, all nice, all pretty little trees, but their roots do what they want to do. They're not dug up, they're not controlled. They're just garden trees, right? So I shape them, I make them look pretty. They're all good. I don't effectively water my outside garden during summer, so they struggle to get moisture, but the root system is left to its own accord, right? So it does what it wants to do, how it wants to do it, and it grows in. It cannot be controlled where that root system grows or the soil that it's in. It's whatever's in my yard. Is a hole's been dug, it's some nice mulch been put around it, but it's allowed to go. So the environment that tree's grown in is outside of the tree's control, and that's where I see every summer. Every single one of my maples suffers from leaf burn. We get a nice couple of warm days back to back to back, and you get some strong winds, and that are nice and warm and like an oven door's been left open. Then I find that the leaf on the garden maples really suffers, and it's every year. Doesn't do much damage, but it means that leaf burn comes from a failure of transpiration. All right, transpiration, probably the most important thing that I stress to every single person that I ever talk to bonsai about. It's the flow of water and nutrients through the tree from its root system, up its trunk, along its branches, along the leaves to the furthest point, and then it evaporates, right? So when there's a transpiration failure, the water doesn't get to where it needs to be before it evaporates out the leaf system. So the first time you see a transpiration failure is on the furthest tip on a leaf, because it's the furthest place from the root system. And then the leaf starts to burn gradually from the tips in right the way along. And then if it's extreme enough, you'll find that the branches start to then burn as well. If there's water in something, it can't burn. All right? It's a very simple approach. If there's water inside a leaf, it cannot burn. So when you get leaf burn on your bonsai, it means that there is not water inside that leaf to protect it from the sun. All right? And that's where this question was raised, that your maples seem to be in really open environments, and whenever you put photos up in summer, or there's no leaf burn, and there's not, because I focus very heavily on the root system. I don't take watering out of the equation. Don't think about watering. Don't think, oh yeah, he must water 15 times a day, because that's irrelevant. If you've got a crap root system, if your root system on your bonsai is terrible, then it doesn't matter how much water you're putting on there. If the root system cannot support the foliage mass that it's got, there's a cost, there's a consequence to that, and that always comes in the form of dieback, leaf burn, whatever it is, right? So if you focus on the root system for starters, and that all starts now, like we're heading into winter. So at the moment, it's all about repotting preparation, making sure I've got all my ducks lined up so I'm ready to go. So when I get to my repotting time for my maples, which for me is July, I'm ready to go. I'm not getting to July going, geez, I don't have enough to do all my maples. I'll just do that one, and that one. And those couple, well, they'll be right for another year, because I know that those couple that I've left, I am going to have troubles in 6-7 months' time when I get the extreme heat. I'm going to get leaf burn. I'm going to turn around and go, oh, my watering wasn't right. It wasn't this. It wasn't. No. Come back. You didn't repot the bloody thing when you should have. So therefore your root system now isn't strong enough to get water through its system to get to that leaf. So when you do get that 40-odd degree day and you get that scorching wind, that you can prevent leaf burn. If you do have a poor root system and you're heading towards summer and you haven't repotted, then by all means protect the tree. Take it out of the sun. Put it in your garage when you know that the temperature is going to be extreme. Shelter it a little bit. Does it necessarily do the right thing by your bonsai? No, not really, because you've got to learn from the mistakes. If you're moving your trees to shelter them excessively from hot days, you need to do something about the root system. The root system is the engine. The root system is what controls the strength of our trees. You know, it's the core fundamental. If we can all get that right, then we can keep that evolution and design of our bonsais going on the path that we want. You know, we're not going to be hindered because of a dieback situation. We're not going to be suffering because of leaf burn. You know, we're not going to look at it and go, well, the leaves are buggered now from summer, so when autumn gets here, what am I going to do? I love the autumn colours, and now it's been destroyed with 2 hot days. It's like, damn you, hot weather. It's like, no, it's nothing to do with the hot weather. It's got to do with you not using the right soil medium to focus on root growth. You've focused on water retention or moisture retention in your soil system, as opposed to focusing on how do I get the strongest possible root system I can? What medium do I use to do it? And it's common that you focus on before the veil's been lifted on a strong root system, right? And you look at that potting mix and you look at the pumice in it and you go, there's no way. There's no way that can sustain my tree. Once the veil's lifted and you change your focus on going, I need something which has got more organic material for the tree to feed off, or that will hold more water. I can't have my trees dry out over summer. You can't have them dry out over summer, but that mix that you're using on your trees is going to be coming at a cost to the root system, which you will see on those hot days, which means that you will get leaf burn continually. You'll never be able to stop it. And it's not something that you have to encounter. It's not something that is just the way it is because you've got Japanese maples. It's because you won't have a crack, won't have a go. You know, a lot of people that I've worked with have dabbled in changing soil mix at the start years ago, but now they're boots and all into it. It's like, yep, it's the only. I had a workshop this morning, and I had people talking in the background. Someone's relatively new to it, new to working with Bonsai Matsu, new to working with me. They're like, oh yeah, I'm not sure. And then, you know, someone's like, well, I don't use anything else because once you've had it, and look at my trees. It's like, you know, and that's the thing. The proof is in the pudding. You know, I never ever say, you know, do this, but I do that, or make it something which is beyond the normal, beyond the average bonsai practitioner's grasp. You know, it's great. Well, you use soil mix, which is worth about $3,000 a year. How the hell can I do that? Oh, that's great. Thanks very much. Or, you know, you do this to your trees, or you do that to your trees. It's like, no. I'm the same as you. Like, I'm in the same boat. I keep my trees in exactly the same environment, and the soil mix that I say you should use is exactly the one that I use. So the results, you know, talk about that repeatability and consistency of outcome. It all comes from doing the same thing year on year on year. And yeah, sure, I could change. I could substitute things out. I could use, you know, things like Akadama, or I could use Zilla. I could do anything. But I know with the soil mix that I use, I can get almost guaranteed, consistency of results. And it means that when I come to fertilising my trees, I get consistency of results. And it's repeatable. I can do it year after year after year with my trees, and I know exactly what's going to happen. So the plans that I set are achievable. And that's what I mean. Like, if you come back to where I started this talking about the maples and how do you avoid leaf burn, it's from the engine. It's from the boring part of the tree that you never really look at, below the nabari. What happens in that beautiful pot that you've got for your trees? That's where the magic happens, because the rest of it, you know, it's really nice to have nice structure, but there's no way you have a nice structure without a really solid root system. And that's where, coming back to maples, how do I avoid leaf burn? Yep, I use a great soil mix, and I make sure that the trees are repotted when they should be. I focus on transpiration. I focus on making sure that my system, my engine that's going to be pumping the water up, the fire truck that's pumping the water up to those leaves to avoid the burn, is in peak condition. That also comes with things like preventative spraying for pests. Now, it's controversial, creates a bit of issue, but for me, I'm on the front foot with it. So I make sure that my trees are in optimum condition, so they're not allocating resources where they don't need to because they've got an issue, got a problem with it. Second thing I do, I'm a really good waterer. Sorry, take that back. I water quite frequently. Being good at watering is very different to frequent watering, and I'd say I'm an okay waterer, but I've still got bucket loads to learn with it, and I always get caught by surprise. So scrap that part of the podcast. But I do frequently water, and I do have backup systems in place, automated systems that if I'm not around and it is hot and I want to cool the environment down, yep, sure as hell I can get in and I can do that and I can take care of it. So there's a lot more that goes into it. I've got a shade cloth system that when it gets hot and I know those days are coming, I can pull that little bit of shade cloth over, and some of the more delicate plants can go up into that area to be protected. But there's a hell of a lot of trees that I've got in my yard, and a lot of them don't get moved, or they can't get moved, and they can't all fit in that space. So there are others that are fully exposed to the elements 100% and still don't get that massive leaf burn that you can get. So you want to avoid leaf burn? Really, really simple. Focus on the roots of the tree, and then build the rest of the system that comes with it. If you've got I'll say it one more time, if you've got a really poor root system on your tree, it doesn't matter how much you're fertilizing. You can be pouring that stuff on there. You can basically be doing way more than what you should. But if your root system is really poor, the tree won't be able to take it up. So you're on a hiding to nothing. You think you're doing the right thing, but it all comes back to those roots and the root system on your tree to avoid the issues. And like I said, you focus on it. What I do this July helps me in which is my repotting season, so end of winter for us in Southern Hemisphere. For me, what I do in repotting time helps me in summer this year. It helps me in summer next year. It helps me in summer the year after. So doing it right once means I've got years of stress-free worrying about that root system. And not only does the root system help me with transpiration, with the leaf burn that this particular topic's about, but it also helps me with future growth. Because if it's one-to-one, like if you go with me on this, but if your root system supports the foliage that you've got, as your root system grows and becomes stronger, then the foliage, the back budding, the potential for more branches that you've got on your bonsai gets greater and greater as well. If your root system stays really poor year on year, then you look back on those trees 30, 40 years down the track and go, they look exactly the same. I might get a bud here or a bud there, they grow a bit, then something else dies. It's like the root system clearly cannot support what is being grown, and the trees go on this treadmill of life. I'm not going to die. I'm not giving up that easy. But they just wait. They're just waiting on the treadmill going, fix things, improve it, make it so my engine can get going. And then when it gets changed, they're amazing trees. They make their hair stand up on my arms, because once they get put into that right environment, they go, right, bang, off I go. They renew, they rejuvenate, they push out new growth, and they're not like us, like I've talked about. We get old. We show signs of age. They show signs of age, but that young, fresh growth, every year they're designed to keep going. Fresh, here's some new leaves, here's some new needles, here's some new buds, and they'll just keep going. So they will wait for you to be ready, but make sure that you're ready sooner rather than later. All right, so that brings us to the end of another podcast. Thanks for sticking around as always. You guys and girls are great. I love you all, and it's really nice with the feedback and the comments. And it helps me sleep better at night, knowing that in some simple way I can make people love their bonsai more, and maybe add a little bit of a sparkle to their life somewhere along the way. And you guys letting me know about it really provides the encouragement that I enjoy. I don't need it because it's something that I feel like I enjoy doing, but it's rewarding. So thank you very, very much, and please continue to stay in touch whenever you feel that urge to maybe rekindle a spark a little bit, or you get a bit stumped and a bit lost. I say doing something wrong is better than doing nothing right. So you'll just keep going, keep at it, keep your tools nice and sharp, keep focus on the prize, keep sticking with that plan that you've got. Try not to chop and change too much. If you're in a growing season, enjoy it. If you're heading towards some warm weather, I envy you, because for me it's fire season, which I love, lighting the fire and sitting down in front of the fire watching the footy on TV on a weekend and having a nice old ice cold beer. It's nothing more satisfying than that after a day with the trees. So I do find at the moment though I've got sore hands starting to form from putting wire on trees. I can feel it in my knuckles. So anyway, make sure that you enjoy your trees as always. Focus on what you need to, depending on what season you're heading in towards. Get ready for it. And if it's winter, then it's going to be cold and wet. That make sure that you do the right thing by your trees so they can keep taking those steps forwards. As always, until next time, happy bonsai.